We are back with a Cycle exclusive. Joining me now for their first ever live TV interview together, Republican Senator Rand Paul and Democratic Senator Cory Booker. Welcome, gentlemen. Are you guys having fun yet here? Your first live interview?
We are. We're hoping that you're going to really entertain us and ask us some really tough questions.
Well, let's start with this REDEEM Act that you have put forward. It basically reforms background checks, Senator Paul, to make it easier for ex-felons and low-level drug offenders to get jobs. Why is that important?
I think people deserve a second chance. I think a lot of kids growing up make mistakes, and they deserve a second chance. And particularly if you don't want them to go back into the cycle of drugs and crime, you want them to be employed. And so the best way to be employed is not to punish them forever with maybe something they did wrong when they were a kid.
And Senator Booker, what about employers who say they would like to know whether someone has a record?
Well, is it relevant is a question, and if it's a non-violent crime, how long does a person be punished for this? So if you're 30 years into your career, and I've had people come to me with these cases, they did a non-violent drug offense for doing something, frankly, that the last 3 presidents have admitted to doing, and they're still having to check a box that they have a felony conviction for marijuana possession. So comes the time of proportionality, and for non-violent offenses, there should be a pathway for expungement that has to go back before a judge, as we allow, that has to have prosecutorial input. But this is actually within the societal interest, because we want people to be economically making contributions. And what we have a system right now is that we put up so many barriers. We deny people who come out of prison for nonviolent offenses so many things, from Pell Grants to safety net provisions, even business licenses. And so what Rand and I just wanted to do is say, hey, you know what? We have such high levels of recidivism. Right. In this country, we pay an egregious amount
Senator
of money.
Booker, you mentioned those benefits. This bill actually would roll back part of the bipartisan '96 welfare law that President Clinton signed that was taking away food stamp and welfare benefits from some people who had committed offenses. Why do you do that, and what do you say to people who say, well, that law struck the right balance?
Again, it's proportionality, and I think a lot of Americans understand that for nonviolent drug offenses, which from presidents to CEOs, a behavior that they may have themselves engaged in, it's not proportional for the rest of that person's life to deny them some basic benefits. Take, for example, a guy is 40 years old, screwed up when he was 16 years old, loses his hours at the factory, needs to get food stamps or SNAP benefits, and we say absolutely not, because 30 years ago you had a nonviolent drug offense. And this is all about empowering, because our taxpayers pay way too much money for 3 out of 4 of our people recidivating because they don't see any economic opportunity.
Right, and you've both pointed out there are racial disparities there, and that's part of what you want to do, reforming the war on drugs. Senator Paul, in your view, is the enforcement of the war on drugs racist?
Well, I think it has a racial outcome, I think, is a better way to put it. I think it's inadvertent, so I don't think everybody's plotting to make it that way. But you can't escape the facts that, 3 out of 4 people in prison are black or brown for drug problems. And frankly, I think it has to do with several things. It's easier to arrest people who live in poverty. It's easier to arrest people who live close together. It's easier to arrest people where there are more patrols going on. And then we also give government grants to the police force based on arrest and conviction records.
So you think it's accidentally racist?
Well, yeah, I think it has a racial outcome, and that's one reason. We should fix it whether it did or didn't have a racial outcome. But because it has a racial outcome, I think there's even stronger motivation that, if I told you, 10 people were being put to death that were black for every one, you'd be concerned, would there be a racial element to that? Yeah, I think it should give us more drive to fix the problem. But the problem really of the war on drugs is taking a lot of people who make youthful mistakes. It's punishing them for a lifetime. And I think if we can get them back into both voting as well as working, they're much less likely to get in trouble.
And yet, Senator Booker, how we define the problem affects the approach we take. Is it a segregation problem that's race-based, or is it accidental? Do you think it's accidentally racist or explicitly so?
I think you're complicating this far more than it needs to be. Rand said it very simply. This has a profound racially disparate impact, and we need to solve it using means by which we just take a dumb, broken system, frankly, and make it work for every American. It does not benefit Americans to spend $250 billion locking up nonviolent drug offenders and others in the way that we do. And so then when you start looking at how, as you said so perfectly, how this hurts poor people, hurts minorities more, and creates savage realities. We have more African Americans. Remember, blacks and whites have no difference in drug usage rates, but significant significant differences in drug arrest rates, almost 4 times more likely to be arrested if you're African American. And that's why now we have a system. Think about this right now. We have more African Americans in this country now under criminal supervision than all the slaves in 1850. So this system is broken. You don't need to be black or white. You don't need to call it racial impact. You just got to do something about it.
And part of what your bill does is also remove some of the stigma that might be associated with ex-convicts. Why is that important?
Well, you know, I think the thing is that it shouldn't be a lifelong. You should get a second chance. So it can't be that you made a youthful mistake and that it's going to carry with you forever. Plus, if you make it carry like a dead weight for people, like an albatross, then what is the propensity to happen, to get back into crime if you can't get a real job? So I think there's every reason to do this. I think, as Cory has mentioned many times, this is a conservative notion in the sense that also we're spending an enormous amount of money on prisons. And so I think the people who are harming other people should be kept away from society. The people who have made a mistake to harm themselves ought to get a second chance.
And you also have
the explosion of, I mean, our prison population has exploded tenfold since 1980 alone. These are an enormous amount of resources our country now is pouring into this system that could be better invested in tax relief, could be better invested in empowering people economically and fixing our roads. And so the urgency to do this really affects us all.
And Senator Booker, you also have a ban in here on solitary confinement for children. Do you agree with what the UN has said recently, that solitary confinement can amount to torture?
Yeah, I mean, people don't realize this practice of solitary confinement has incredibly negative effects on the development of young people. So to take 15, 16, 17-year-olds, put them in solitary confinement, the damage that you're doing to them, the recorded damages physically, emotionally, the scars you're giving them can now affect their lives as they go forward. And so we are now engaging in things in our country that everybody here in America, forget the UN for a second, study after study shows. In fact, the majority of our suicides amongst young people happens either when they're in solitary confinement or afterwards. And so this is a practice we don't need to keep young people safe or to keep society safe. And in fact, if we're interested in empowering people to succeed after prison, we would get rid of this practice almost in totality.
When you think about it, somebody smoked pot, somebody sold pot, and we're going to put them in solitary confinement. That's the punishment for this. So it's ridiculous. And I think our attitudes towards this are changing. I still don't think any of these drugs are a good idea. I just think the punishment that we've chosen is very wrong. But another thing we're on the same page with is like medical marijuana. I had lunch yesterday with a guy whose 2-year-old child, he's moved to Colorado so he can get her treatment. She has over 100 seizures every day.
Wow.
And I want to meet the politician who's not going to let her have some oil.
Access to that.
They've actually taken the THC out of the oil, and he's using the oil. He's convinced that his daughter can function better. 100 seizures a day is so devastating that you can get
right, and that's a medical
damage.
aspect.
Yeah,
I want to ask you, as we're talking about restoring civil rights here, of course, you know, you stirred up a lot of controversy with the 2010 comments.
Me?
And
controversy?
Part of what you said at the time, Senator, was that you had concerns about the rules for private business while you support most of the Civil Rights Act. Why did you evolve on rules for private business?
What I would say is that, to be fair to myself, because I like to be fair to myself, is that I've always been in favor of the Civil Rights Act. So people need to get over themselves writing all this stuff that I've changed my mind on the Civil Rights Act. Have I ever had a philosophical discussion about all aspects of it? Yeah, and I learned my lesson. To come on MSNBC and have a philosophical discussion, the liberals will come out of the woodwork and they will go crazy and say you're against the Civil Rights Act and you're some terrible racist. And I take great objection to that, because in Congress, I think there is nobody else trying harder to get people back their voting rights, to get people back and make the criminal justice system fair. So I take great offense to people who want to portray me as something that I'm not.
But when you said, well, here, the rules for private businesses are concerning, why not explain that you've evolved on that?
Well, because I never was opposed to the Civil Rights Act, and I've been attacked by half a dozen people on your network trying to say that I'm opposed to the Civil Rights Act, and somehow now I've changed. So I'm not really willing to engage with people who are misrepresenting, you know, my viewpoint on this.
Right. I mean, yeah, what you...
Because I have never been against the Civil Rights Act. I have never said I was against it. So for people to say that, really, they don't want to have an honest discussion about it.
Right. No, I think the honest discussion is, you said that some titles of it, Title II and Title VII, that relate to
the honest discussion of
businesses.
It would be that I never was opposed to the Civil Rights Act. And when your network does 24-hour news telling the truth, then maybe we can get somewhere with the discussion.
Let me go back to you, Senator Booker. On the politics of this, do you think this is actually easier for you to support than Senator Paul?
Honestly, right now, I don't care about the politics. This is an issue of justice. I'm finding allies all across the board. This is sort of a post-partisan issue. You have Grover Norquist coming out for it. You have people like Newt Gingrich. You have Christian evangelical leaders. You have liberals. You have libertarians. This is an issue whose time has come. America has a broken criminal justice system. We have 4 to 5% of the globe's population. 25% of the globe's prisoners are right here. Our taxpayers are carrying that burden. We're destroying lives. We're making communities less safe. You guys on this station have covered urban violence a lot. As I found out as a mayor, is that when you start kids young, shoving them in systems, putting them in solitary confinement, giving them those emotional scars they often get, bringing them back out, not empowering them to succeed, they end up back in prison in this cycle that goes on and on and on until the crimes begin to get violent and they themselves become victims. And so if we really are interested in doing something about this, we're not going to let the politics stop us. We're not going to let about presidential concerns. Let's focus today on this issue and driving home in this country that we are suffering as a whole, and too many people are having their liberty removed over nonviolent drug offenses.
Let me ask you both, in the limited time we have, you're working together here doing a bipartisan approach. Have you learned anything from each other so far, Senator Paul?
You know, I think that when Senator Booker first came here, I thought he would be somebody that would be open to discussion, and I think he's proven to be that, and I think we work in a very collegial way, so we're actually looking for other opportunities, and one of the things that I've been interested in is a way we can do something to combat poverty in our large cities. And so we have a plan, something like Jack Kemp's enterprise zones, to try to stimulate economic activity, and we're hoping Senator Booker will take a look at it.
Senator Booker?
Just if you focus on fixing problems, you're going to find lots of allies, and it's great to find people on different issues across the aisle. It's been a pleasure to work with not just Rand Paul, but as you know, in Washington, it's often your teams that are working together. This has been a great pleasure, but we got to get this over the finish line.
And you guys have had some fun. You posted a selfie together. The Hill just ranked them.
That was all Senator Booker. It had nothing to do with that. I was sandbagged on the selfie.
And Senator, the Hill just put out their most beautiful people list. You, Senator Paul, rank higher than Senator Booker. Does that sound right to you?
You know, my comment on the whole thing is that if I got on any list, it must have been a really low bar. So I don't know how this happened.
Senator Booker?
I think this is the one part of the interview I will say no comment.
No comment at the end. Senator Rand Paul, Senator Cory Booker, the Redeem Act, thank you both for telling us about your work here on criminal justice. You can also find more reporting on the criminal justice issues we talked about in Presumed Guilty at msnbc.com/presumed-guilty. It's up there on the screen as well. Again, thanks to Senator Booker and Senator Paul for this discussion, and we will be back in a moment.